We've located the event, we've given it a title and a description. Now let's give it a start and an end time. History in Motion inserts today's date and time as a default unless there is at least one event in the scenario, in which case it uses the start time of the earliest event. This is simply the default. Now we could click on this button here and get the calendar widget to come up and choose a date, but since it's so far in the past, let's just edit it directly. Grant relates that he left Ripley in mid-May 1839, so let's choose May 15th, 1839 as the date. This was a common era date, so we just leave the radio button set to that. As to the date specificity, Grant said mid-May, so you could say, well, it was circa May 15th, but I prefer to use circa when the time uncertainty is much greater, like at least a year or so. So in that case, we'll just leave it as an exact date. Now, Grant did not relate the exact hour and minute when he left Ripley, and in fact, he commented that the boats didn't really run on a regular schedule. In the larger scheme of this scenario, it really doesn't matter what time he left. We'll deal with this question of time granularity in the video on time formatting. For now, let's just set this to noon. As for time zone, as I mentioned in the video on scenario creation, time zones are really only relevant for 20th century scenarios that have events that span multiple time zones, which this certainly does not. So in that case, we'll just leave it at the default, which we get from the scenario, namely universal time. The fields for end time are the same as start time. So one of the things that History in Motion checks for is that the end time is strictly later than the start time. So let's say that he stayed in Ripley for a day, which given the uncertainty of the steamboats is not unreasonable. So let's make that May 16th. And again, let's just set that to be noon. One important thing to notice is that we may want to create events that are timeless. In other words, locations, such as a town, a fort, a building, which are always there during the entire duration of the scenario. In order to do that, just set the end time, the end date, the start time, and the start date all to blank. If you leave one of them non-blank, History in Motion will assume that you made an error and report it as such. So now we've entered all the information that History in Motion requires, so we can click Save, and the event is created. Now let's click on the event itself. There it is, so we click on it. Here's the title of the event. Here's the start and the end time. Here's the text we had in the description. Here's the italicized and the bold italic text. Let's move that back down here. Okay, here's the link to Grant's Boyhood Home, so let's click on that. There it is. And also notice that the event shows up in the list of events that we can edit. And things are separated by locations and events. So that concludes creating point events and a lot of material for events in general. In the next videos, we'll cover creating path and area events and animating them.